Welcome everybody to Mary Giuliani Live. I am so excited you guys are here tonight. I have got a wonderful guest tonight. We've got Hilary Jacobs Hendel, and she is a psychotherapist, and she's all about helping you really uncover what might be underneath some depression or anxiety that you might be struggling with. And she's got a great new book called It's Not Always Depression. So we're going to get right to her in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge what we're here to do on this show. My show is Mary Giuliani Live, and the reason I even launched this show is because 30 years ago when I got on my personal growth path, watching a bunch of Oprahs and hearing a lot of people sharing their stories of personal growth and transformation is what really made a huge difference for me in taking my life to the next level. And so I'm like loving being able to also share other people's stories of personal transformation. And Hilary's got an amazing style of psychotherapy she's doing, and I'm really excited to bring it forth so you guys can hear about it and learn about it and possibly even get involved with this type of therapy. It's really, really powerful. But before we get to Hilary, I just want to mention, make sure that if you would like to see replays of my shows or know who the guests are that are coming up, that you go up to marygiuliani.net and there's a Get Show Updates tab and just sign up for my newsletter. I only send out a newsletter like maybe once every couple of weeks. And again, you'll get the replay of this show and other shows, as well as links or updates on the guests that are coming up and other things that are going on in my career. So I've got some really exciting things coming up in the next month or two. So I'll be sharing that in the next show. So with that, I want to introduce Hilary Jacobs Hendel. She's an LCSW, she's a psychotherapist, and the author of It's Not Always Depression, Listen to the Body, Discover Core Emotions, and Connect to Your Authentic Self. Now, Hilary is a certified psychoanalyst and an AEDP psychotherapist and supervisor. She's published articles in the New York Times, and she's also in professional journals, and she was also, get this, the mental health consultant on AMC's Mad Men. And she resides in New York City. And so let's all give her a great big welcome. But one thing, before we welcome her, I want to acknowledge that the visitors that are watching, you can ask Hilary questions in real time. So just plug in your questions in the chat right below the box in Facebook, and Hilary would be glad to answer them. So with that, let's cut over to Hilary and welcome. Hey, Hilary, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks for having me, Mary.
Oh, well, you're so welcome. Well, you know, when I actually was connected to you through one of my buddies at the acesconnection.com, and I love, just after hearing about your book and reading your book, it was so relevant to some of the breakthroughs that I've had recently, and then reading your book was so powerful that it was just a no-brainer for me to want to invite you on to the show. So, you know,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You know, the first thing I just kind of get a feel for you, but like, what was the purpose of you writing this book? Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Oh, I'd love to share about that. I guess in a nutshell, I feel like in my most dramatic, I feel like it's a complete outrage that we don't get any emotion education. And I think that people don't know this information exists, because I had never heard it until I was past my master's in social work. I knew I wanted to be a psychotherapist. I was about to enter into psychoanalytic training because I thought that was really all there was. There was that and CBT, and I knew I wanted kind of a classical education. And then I stumbled into an emotion conference, an emotion and attachment conference. People like Dan Siegel were there and Diana Fosha. And I learned all this information that I had never come across in my life. And it was science-based, and I had had an extensive education in science. And it was an omission. And it helped me personally so much in that conference. I became like organized in a new way.
Yeah.
And from then on, I felt I sort of was sharing it with friends and family. And then, 10 years later, I had this great opportunity to write about it.
Right.
And so my mission is really to share emotion education with the public, emotional health.
Well, oh my God, it's so powerful because I've been involved with personal development for 30 years, and just recently I got in touch with learning about more body-mind based approaches to therapy that I'd never really knew about before, and how powerful they are compared to, talk therapy has been really helpful in many ways for me, but it didn't get to the core, some of the core issues that had been really, I'd been suffering with for many years. So, so would you mind
Yeah.
sharing a little bit just about your story, about how you got involved with therapy and that sort of thing, just so people can get a feel for you?
Yes. And first, can I just
Oh,
clarify something
absolutely.
that I do? So I consider what I do talk therapy,
Right.
as opposed to hands-on, which I've had
Right.
sort of where we
Right.
don't talk. The difference is it's not only what you're thinking and kind of insights, we're now incorporating and asking, what's
Right.
happening below the neck, which is where transformation, rapid transformation happens.
Right.
And also, I just wanted to clarify that the book is about therapy, but it's also self-help, so that whoever's listening to this out there, just I think there's something for everybody here. I really do. And so if you're not into therapy, but you're into change, there's
Right.
something here for you, and vice versa.
Yeah, you make
So
it
just wanted
super
to,
accessible to anybody. So yes, thank you for
and
clarifying
it
that.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that it is.
you're so
That, yeah,
welcome.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so my journey really, in a nutshell, started because I was born, some would say by good fortune, and some would say by poor fortune, into a family where my dad was a psychiatrist and my mother had been a guidance counselor. So we were it was a very psychologically oriented family. And but really, it was Sigmund Freud who was the hero in the family. And
Ah, okay.
I became very interested in psychology from the beginning of my life, and was always reading self-help books, always into personal growth,
Hmm.
analyzing my friends when I was 13 years old until they told me, you better stop or we're not going to be your friend anymore.
I know I have that
And
problem too.
not good, not good.
Ah,
And so that really became sort of a primary passion for me, but I didn't go into the field initially. My first career, thought I was going to become a physician.
hmm.
Ended up becoming a dentist because I didn't want to deal with. I started to get frightened that I would be upset dealing with people very, very sick and dying, and I was
Yeah.
sensitive, and I didn't. I knew it would make me anxious, so
Hmm.
I kind of took a career turn, and then later on returned back to this passion, and this was the right one because I'm very happy in my career now.
Yeah.
And I started really with my own therapy in
Hmm.
college, where they gave you 15 free sessions,
Oh, okay.
and I always liked being in therapy since then in various kinds, but it really wasn't until I went all uh, in really even knowing what my problems were, until I discovered really emotion theory and attachment theory and and neuroplasticity and neuroscience,
Hmm.
that resonated with me. But I had been lying on a Freudian couch for 3 times a week for 4 years, so
Well,
I'd done my insight work.
yeah. Well, you're a
And then,
psychoanalyst too, right? I mean,
yeah, we
yeah.
had to do that for school. But I struggled always with I struggled with a lot about that always. But I just thought that was my problem and it wasn't the method. Now I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
the method is just, it's like one half of it's just leaving out a whole bunch of experiential
Yes.
aspects of what humans are about,
Yes. I agree. I mean,
particularly the
although
connection piece. Yeah.
I have to admit, I haven't been in psychoanalytic therapy, but just from what I've read,
Hmm.
it makes sense to me. Well, just let's get
Okay.
into your book now. As far you have this powerful concept called the change triangle, and
Hmm.
so could you share with the audience what it is, or if you want, I can put it up on the screen, or however you want me to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me just first.
Yeah.
We'll show it in a minute.
Okay. Sure.
Let me just say what it is. Uh, what I did was I didn't invent anything new. My mentor in this type of therapy that I was exposed to at this attachment conference and fell in love with, and just felt immediately, it was about authenticity. It was about permission to really connect with the people that I was working with, to be my warm, genuine self that I wanted to be, and in psychoanalytic training was really told to kind of, there was a little bit more distance that they wanted, a little more of a lid on that type of connection. So this type of way of working, which stands for experiential, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, is steeped in a few different theories that Diana Fosha integrated. One aspect of this was this triangle that was really mapping out the relationship. Maybe actually you could put it up now, and then I'll kind of talk about
I can do that.
the derivation. Yeah, if you do it, it might be easier. So, this is a triangle, and you can see that the three corners, the bottom, you want to kind of imagine this triangle superimposed on your body with the bottom of the triangle in your core, kind of between your heart and your stomach. And at the bottom of the triangle are these core emotions, which are these basic survival emotions that we don't have any control over. They are there and have evolved over hundreds of millions of years to make sure that humans survive, so that the environment has something going on, and we take in the environment through our five senses, our eyes, our ears, taste, feel, hearing, and then it triggers emotions if there's something that we need to be either cautious about or that we want to go forward to. So anger, fear, sadness, disgust, which are sort of people consider on the negative side, and joy and excitement and sexual excitement on the positive side. These things get triggered without conscious control.
And I'll go back to the diagram. So at the very bottom tip is the core emotions.
Yeah, so at the very bottom are the core emotions. And the reason those are superimposed in your body is because as soon as they're triggered in the middle of the brain, the emotion centers called the limbic system or the amygdala, they trigger a cascade of reactions in the body to ready it for an adaptive action, like running when there's a dangerous animal, or fighting when somebody is threatening to you and you have to fight to survive.
Right.
So these things, the first aha moment I had at this conference was the idea that emotions just are, and that you can't control them. And all of a sudden I was like, you mean I'm not weak for having feelings, which is what the message is in our culture.
Totally.
Is, it's, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and mind over matter. And it's a myth because these things, we don't know we're having a feeling until the feeling has already been triggered. Once it's triggered and we're aware of it, we now have some power over how to work with it, either to get to a calmer place, to have our body relax again, because these emotions trigger activity, and they trigger some sort of energy, like not in the necessarily the woo-woo sense of energy, but literally energy, that's because we have to usually move.
I mean, like whenever you feel like angry, you feel energy, or if you feel like fear, you're going to feel energy. So those are those core emotions.
Excitement or joy. Exactly. And sadness, it's not so, it's sort of the inverse of that. It's sort of energy inward. So basically the triangle is mapping out the relationship between core emotions and what happens when we then have to become civilized in our world and connect with other people. They may not welcome our emotions, or they, that we're human beings do better when they stay in groups and in tribes. And so these, on the top of the triangle, we have these inhibitory emotions, which kind of push down our core emotions. You see on the top right, it says inhibitory emotions. And those are anxiety, guilt, and shame. And those, in a way, keep us connected to each other, so that if we do something that someone doesn't like and it threatens us being banished, like shame basically makes sure that we're not all peeing on the street and acting only in our best interest, right? So there's healthy shame. But when we are constantly told we are bad, or we should be another way than we are, or we shouldn't be having certain emotions, we are having too much shame, and then that becomes too much inhibition, and we develop symptoms. Sort of emotions come up, and these inhibitory emotions come down, and it creates like a pressure cooker. It creates stress on the mind and body. And then the third corner of the triangle is what happens when we have this discomforting feeling inside of either core emotions, too many core emotions, too many inhibitory emotions, and we feel ill at ease in our bodies, and then we move over and create defenses,
Right.
which are these kind of fabulous adaptations that our brain and body does in the moment to help us cope from something that feels unbearable
Right.
or uncomfortable.
Well,
And yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Well, and the thing that really blew my mind about this concept was, I'd been working, I did like 5 years of healing shame work with Brene Brown's curriculum, which was super powerful. But even with all of that, I didn't know that shame was an inhibitory emotion that was really sort of keeping the core emotions pushed down. I mean, and I knew that like the defenses were like addictions or other types of things, but I didn't. So this is like really, sort of mind-blowing for me that I didn't even know this, because like I'm always sniffing around everything to try to figure out, how my mind and my body and my spirit work together. So is this AEDP concept, or is this the change triangle concept?
No, so again, it's not even, so this triangle was originally written about in the 1970s by David Malin in textbooks. It was academic. David Malin came from a group of people trying to make psychoanalysis work faster. Then Diana Fosha took the triangle from David Malin and the ISTDP world, which is intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy. Diana adapted the triangle along with attachment theory and all these other. She synthesized a huge body of research to come up with AEDP, which is using a more of empathic stance to help people bypass defenses and get more in touch with what they're feeling. So it's more of an empathic. That's the kind of
therapy you do. Excuse me.
That's the therapy. Then what I did is I took what she was calling the triangle of experience,
right,
and I adapted it for the public because I thought this does not need to stay with a small group of experientially trained psychotherapists when everybody can benefit from understanding their emotions, because we're all suffering from emotional diseases and emotional problems and symptoms. And it's universal across culture, race, gender. And it's a great, simple way to understand what ails.
Work. So, let's go back to it, and so just so people at home can get a feel for it. So, I'll use myself for example. I thankfully I've been maintaining a 160-pound weight loss for over 15 years, but food was a big defense. Would that be considered a defense in terms of?
Yes.
Okay. So, using
it's a
food,
behavior.
Was one of the defenses. And then I thought I thought that shame was the driver of overeating or using food to numb emotions. But what you're saying, if I'm correct, is that, well, it's like what's even underneath shame is probably anger or sadness or whatever that childhood emotion that I didn't process is, right?
Exactly. So I would just make one tweak to that, and I would say that what causes the behavior then now is the combination of these core emotions that want expression, right? The body knows what it needs to heal, so it keeps kind of pushing up, saying this is unfinished business. The shame is just like pushing down. So the combination of shame on top of core emotions really is excruciatingly painful, and that's why intense behaviors like addiction and what people call eating disorders, eating disorders, but even personality disorders, are complex trauma. As far as I'm concerned, you treat it the same way by helping somebody move over these big armored defenses or big behavioral defenses, and you make it safe for them to work with shame to try to transform it so that you can get to the underlying emotions and liberate them, and then the whole nervous system starts to regulate
Yeah.
and
This
feel
is so
better.
mind-blowing to me because, like I said, I've been like, I got totally into healing my shame stuff with Brene Brown, and I don't remember her ever even touching on this stuff underneath it. So, and not to say that, it wasn't, a good thing, but I'm just saying it's
Right.
so cool that you're going much even deeper. You know what I mean?
Deeper. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And, shame work can take a while. So all these different ways of approaching shame, like what Renee's doing and many other people, they're all what they're trying to do is transform the shame so that you get a little bit of space and distance from those shamed parts, right? They're just parts of us
Right.
but they're powerful when they come to the fore. When we're triggered to shame, it feels like everything.
Right.
So
Right.
just trying to keep on making some distance so that we can approach our shame like you would another human being who's suffering, gentle,
Right.
loving, seeing the story of it. And once there's enough space, then the emotions underneath can come up to the fore.
Perfect. Well, thank you. By the way, I just want to remind our viewers that are watching that they can ask Hilary questions. So feel free to punch those into the little chat
Anything.
area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And if I can't answer it, I'll let you know.
Okay. Cool. So my understanding from reading your book is really that the purpose of using the change triangle is to get to what you call an open-hearted state.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and when you fully experience your core emotions, then they get processed, integrated, and then you can really step into more calm, connected, courageous, all of those emotions that are really fun to feel, right?
You got it. You got
And
it.
I love it.
You
I love it.
understand it. Yeah.
Okay, so would you mind sharing a little bit about how we are socialized in our culture to dismiss and avoid emotions? Because this is another, I think, thing that, makes people not even want to do stuff like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the cost
I
of
think
that, too, of not dealing with emotions.
Yes, yes. I think it would be a fascinating, and maybe there is a book on it, to look at sort of the evolution. You can go back to, I don't want to wax too academic or philosophical, but, times have changed. So it used to be that there wasn't even time to think about emotions, right? You just had to forage for food and whatnot. And then it's also that emotions used to be damaging, right? So if people were just expressing emotions, everyone was going around killing each other when they're angry, and that's not okay.
Right.
And then you had Descartes, who said, "I think, therefore I am," and there was a sort of a whole evolution of thought being so important and mastering emotions, because that made you, I guess, the most civilized, and you were sort of a master of your domain and intellectual.
Right.
And then you have the Puritan ethic of, this pick yourself up by your bootstraps,
Yeah.
mind over matter, and then that kind of evolved to suck it up and,
Right.
get over it, which if it worked, I wouldn't have a profession, right? If you
Right.
could just say to
Or
someone.
we wouldn't have all the addictions in our culture.
Exactly. So there's a long history of that, and that's why the education in emotions is so crucial, that you don't even have to work the change triangle. But I wanted to write down just information about emotions, because we don't get any of this education. And I think starting really in elementary school, I think
Right.
100 years from now, this will be incorporated early on, because there's such an advantage to understanding
Yes.
that what emotions are, that they're triggered, and that when they're triggered, they make you feel things in your body, and they also have these adaptive impulses
Yes.
that we don't always want to act on. In fact, we rarely want to act on. When we're angry, we don't want to clobber our partner,
Right.
but we want to know that we're angry, and we want to do something with that anger that's not blocking it, because that causes stress on the mind and body. So some of the things that I share with my patients is, can you imagine taking that anger and putting it in your backbone, and then what does it want to say to assert yourself.
Right.
Or with people that really, were mistreated as children, and not even because their parents or family meant to. They thought they were doing the right thing by
Right.
having a stiff upper lip and, hitting the kid, or, shaming the kid into acting a certain way, and to,
Right.
we try to mold our children. We think we can. And so I have people use fantasy a lot of the time to get you saw in the book how
Yes.
these fantasy portrayals, because the brain doesn't really know the difference between fantasy and reality. You can use fantasy and follow the physical sensations of anger, for example, in the body, so that people can imagine in real time, like it's happening,
Right.
Expressing the anger.
Right.
And anger wants to be mean, it wants to hit, it wants to punch, it wants to call names. You can do this safely
Yes.
in fantasy and get rid of that energy.
Right.
And again, have that nervous system calm down.
And I loved how you shared the actual cases of the patients that you work with, and how they, felt bad about thinking about hurting one of their parents, but using fantasy, they're able to discharge that anger and not have to take it out on whoever else, right?
Exactly. That it just, when people say, "Oh, I feel guilty," or, we try to help them with, well, if we play with these ideas, and
Right.
you imagine doing this, do you think, that your uncle, anything bad's going to happen to your uncle? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, let's just see what happens if we
Right.
play with it. And then, that big leap is sort of just allowing oneself to have an experience. That's the difference between kind of traditional psychoanalytic psychotherapy and CBT, and this is really to have an experience, and have that experience be good at the
Yes.
end, not re-traumatize someone.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Well-
to regulate the nervous system. Yeah.
This is another piece. So I like to go through the different chapters and pull out the nuggets that really spoke to me.
Great.
You said wellness is a byproduct of our ability to tolerate our internal experience.
Mm-hmm.
That is so poignant, and so, it feels like our culture teaches us to like numb out or dissociate or whatever, so that we don't have to feel our feelings. But what you're saying is that learning how to tolerate our emotions, our core emotions, is really the ticket to well-being and a great life.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I'd like to just in terms of timing and stuff is talk about maybe identifying trauma, like childhood trauma, and helping people understand what that is. Because I just realized that I was never beaten or sexually abused as a child, but I just realized 6 months ago that I had my brain was impacted by the emotional neglect and emotional abuse in my home. And I didn't even realize I was running around with a brain that had been impacted and a nervous system that had been impacted for all these years until recently. And so it wasn't until recently that I was able to get the trauma brain-based therapies. Because a lot of people think that trauma is just like an emotional thing, but it's actually a biological thing. So maybe, would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I can just share, I had a lovely young man in my office today who is just adorable, a millennial, and he said to me today, it's amazing that everybody suffers from their childhood, and he had a very lovely childhood. And I said, yes. And we were just talking about that, even if you are, everyone is a unique person. So just being different than your family in some way. Let's say you come from a family of, people who are very good in school, who get good grades, and you struggle.
Right.
You're just more of an artistic person, and that's not your forte. That can bring about these are what I'm calling small T traumas, or ACEs, right? I don't even know if ACEs would call these ACEs, but these are, adverse childhood events, things that just didn't help calm us. They actually brought up feelings, and they brought up agitation, and they brought up differences. So things like bullying and like you said, being emotionally abused. Like if your parents were brought up by critical parents, and they think that they don't even know that they're criticizing or
Right.
comparing you to somebody else, all these things are hurtful.
Right.
And nobody knows that they're hurtful. You just think this is how it is.
Yeah,
But
because it's the
like
only
every
brain
time
and family you lived in. Right.
that's exactly right. And when kids feel bad, they think they are bad.
Right. That's what happened to me.
Yes. And so we take it in, and it's natural because you don't think you think your parents are perfect. So
Right.
they must know something. And if I feel badly and I can't like do things like I can't play sports like my brother does, or I can't focus for a long time like my sister does,
Right.
or I'm not getting enough attention, then there must be something wrong with me.
Well, and I,
And, you know, that's the shame piece. Yeah.
sorry, just to,
That's the shame piece. That's what I was going to
what
say.
I discovered happened to me because I've struggled with food addiction. I've struggled with other like alcohol and, thank God I'm, fine now. It could have gone very wrong. And I'm here
Right,
to
right.
tell the story. But what I realized is that my mother had severe trauma as a child. And so she could not be that calm presence for me as a child, as when I was a baby. And she had a very colically infant when I was born. My sister was only a year older and had horrible colic for a year. And so between my mom's own trauma, and so my mom really couldn't be that calm presence for me. And so what I realized is that I attached to food as a soothing mechanism for me at a very young age, from probably about 4 years old. And so, of course, I developed an eating disorder, and I didn't realize it until this change triangle. Well, plus some other attachment-based therapy stuff, is that what was underneath that is a lot of anger and grief for not getting those childhood needs met, and and needing to really feel that and feel that sadness and so it wasn't even my mom's fault. I mean, her mother was an orphan, so it just keeps going. And so, I was shamed a lot too for having needs. In our family, it was like you put everybody else's needs in front of yours, and if you don't, you're a bad person. So that was the other piece. And so there was the neglect and the abuse. And again, it wasn't like she was calling me horrible names. She was just parenting me the way she had been parented,
Right. Exactly. You're right. And that's why, I think when I work with people and, in my own world, I don't think about blaming parents. Nobody wants to blame their parents. It's really interesting. Most people, no matter how badly they were treated, have a lot of compassion and empathy for their parents.
Yeah.
It's just, I guess it's wiring and it's beautiful. But the parent is what I talk more about. The parent is the responsible party, and as the adult by definition, and it's up to them, ideally to have gotten some help. But again, who didn't, we didn't know from emotions. Just like I wish I had known this stuff 20 years ago. I could have, spared me some damage and damage to other people.
Well, I feel like if I had a child now, I would be a really good parent. But like 10 years ago, no. I mean, I would have passed on a lot of the stuff I hadn't healed. But I like how you put in your book how parents, yes, they are responsible, and instead of feeling shame about it, just feel guilt, which is, I made a mistake, and, acknowledge it and forgive yourself, but not, it's not going to help anybody to keep beating yourself up over it,
I mean, from a parent standpoint, absolutely, and make amends.
Yeah.
It's never too late to say I am sorry and to give a heartfelt apology, right?
Absolutely.
One where you really say, I know I'm accountable for this.
Yeah.
I imagine it had this effect on you, and I am so sorry, and I love you.
Yeah.
And that's powerful.
It is, and it takes a certain level of emotional awareness and stuff for a parent to do that. But I mean, and I guess for me, I just needed to recognize that my mom didn't really have the emotional capacity to even go there. She had too much shame herself,
That's exactly right.
So let's talk a little bit about how trauma is not a sign of weakness, or how we think we had a normal childhood, but then we've got these trauma symptoms, which are depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, addictions.
Yeah. I mean, I think of symptoms again, when in the time that they formed, that we developed these defenses, they saved our life.
Yes.
We would have gone crazy or died. so that these same symptoms that we have, one, we need to acknowledge them, how they have served us, and and really listen to them, what their story is. We can ask a defense, what its job is,
Yes.
how it keeps you safe, how it kept you safe then, and how it continues to keep you safe, and what would it be like, to if it didn't work so hard, this part of you that was maintaining the status quo. So
Absolutely.
The symptoms have meaning.
Yes.
They have meaning, and historically they were important. They were the best that a kid could do, or a young adult, under the circumstances, and they need to be appreciated.
Well, exactly. For
as
me,
opposed to judged.
I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have food. It was like, it was always available. It soothed me. In fact, my dad and I sort of bonded as foodies together. That's how he modeled food as a defense or as a coping mechanism. And when things would get stressful, he'd take me out for pancakes or, banana splits. So that was the deal. Yeah.
Yeah. And it worked. And it was like, again, if you think of the brilliance of you, that you found this thing that was reliable, right? That's like with drugs, right? It's like you take an opioid and you feel better. That's not stupid. It's harmful,
but in the long run,
time,
it can.
Obviously, in the long run, it's not a recipe. Any of these, any living in defensive is not a recipe for wellness. The problem that these things start off as adaptive, and then they become maladaptive.
Well, and what I love about your approach, and I totally agree with it, is that you come from the place of compassion. That our culture looks at addiction as that you're either weak or a failure, or you're making a bad choice, and it's like, nobody grows up to think, I want to grow up and be morbidly obese and an alcoholic. Come on,
Right.
It's like, that's not the choice that I had, but that's what happened to me. And so, and what I realized after I got into compassion for myself was that my addictions were never my fault. I was raised in an environment that my brain developed in a way that I didn't have the impulse control that I could have if I had been in a normal kind of nurturing kind of environment. And so, having that compassion self-compassion is the first step. But then it was like, okay, so now I need to actually learn how to establish attachment relationships so that I can get those needs met, with real people versus substances or work or whatever. So how do you help people shift from titrating off of the defenses or the addictions or whatever into healthier adaptations without them feeling like they're going to die?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Right, you do not yank a defense away from someone until there's something to fill it.
Yeah.
So, and there's a couple of different approaches. Like what you said is to develop, for those people that can develop new relationships outside and new connections, right? Connection is it. Community is so important. That's why things like AA and NA, the community, whether, some of the things may be outdated and need some updating, maybe with some emotion education, but community and undoing aloneness, as we say in AEDP, is crucial. But more than that is helping the adult that I see in my office create and be the mother or be the father to themselves that they never had, because that's teach them how to self-soothe 24/7, because you are always with yourself.
Right.
So that ultimately, I'll speak for myself when something tragic, very sad happens to me. I have learned, through the practice to be in my body, to be with the sadness, and I am relating to my sadness from my open-hearted, what I would call the open-hearted myself, my authentic self.
Yeah.
So that even though I'm triggered, right, I feel my sadness.
Right.
There's enough space that I'm not drowning in it.
Yes.
I am relating to my sadness with compassion.
Yes.
and listening to what it needs. And I may need to pick up the phone and call somebody, and I may need to ask somebody for a hug, and I may need to go to a therapist to cry because it's too painful to cry alone. But ultimately, there's a dialogue inside my head. And so that's what we're trying to do, is create a kind of, through a variety of different ways, grounding and breathing and working with core emotions to get into that open-hearted state, to solidify, and this is a lifelong process, a more and more solid sense of self that you can hang on to.
Right.
With bad weather, so to
Right.
speak, no matter what's happening, whether somebody else has an opinion. You know, a lot of people say, I can't hear someone else's opinion because I lose myself. Okay.
Right.
We want to hang on to yourself and learn to listen and take what you like and don't. Or when they're triggered to a feeling, that you stay anchored to yourself. I'm going to be okay. This is incredibly painful. I'm having an emotion now. And to listen to the emotion, to feel it, to see what the impulses are, and to listen to what it's telling you, because emotions are ultimately a compass for living. They're telling you what is happening in the environment, and we need to listen to them and then bring on our thinking brain also to think through the best way to handle our situation.
Right.
So it's not, a lot of people I think that if you're, you know, as I'm trying to share emotion education, it's not an easy thing because people like, I don't want to know about emotions, or it's too touchy-feely for me. But this is not about wearing your heart on your sleeve, crying at work, you know, being
Right.
a mess. This is about listening to a huge part of your experience that's valuable, and also thinking through how to handle it, so that you have all the best chance you have of meeting the challenges and thriving in life.
Absolutely.
With your full faculties. Yeah.
Well, how about if we talk about, because we're kind of, I mean, I could talk to you for 3 hours at least with this.
There's so much to talk about it.
I know. To talk about the open-hearted state. So, I mean, because that's really the goal. And in reading the last part of your book, you talk about Sarah Redux, the authentic self, and open-hearted state, and so because that's really the goal. And so, like, maybe like how does somebody resolve feeling guilt, shame, or using addictions or perfectionism or other defenses? How do they move? I mean, how do they? What happens to make this open-hearted state like arise?
Yeah. So various different ways. So basically, you know, again, if we have this triangle, we're always trying to move from defenses. Obviously, when we loosen defenses, we feel the anxiety, shame,
Right.
and guilt that's there. Then
Right.
we work our way down to these core emotions. And the reason core emotions are so hugely important is because they're this doorway to the open-hearted state. So anytime you're triggered to an emotion, a core emotion, you're at a fork in the road.
Yeah.
One road brings you up the triangle into defenses, right, when we numb and block and avoid. And the other road takes us into the experience of the feeling,
Right.
where emotions are wave-like. So we feel the feeling, and then, so this is mostly a therapeutic process. Some people can do this on their own, and some people that didn't have a lot of trauma have a better chance of being able to do this on their own. But you may need, not necessarily a therapist, but just somebody else with you to feel a feeling. Like some people don't want to cry alone, for example. You really need a shoulder to cry on. But if you
Right.
let yourself cry, most of us have had the experience where you feel like, oh, I feel better.
Right.
And a lot of people worry if they start crying, they'll never stop. People bury their grief because they think it's so intense, but the truth is that doesn't happen. If it's pure grief, if it's pure sadness, it comes up like a wave, and it goes down, and usually lasts a couple of minutes only.
I know, and that's when one of the things I read in your book that I loved. It was like, if you can just tolerate a couple of minutes of that intense emotion, then it will resolve, integrate, and it doesn't have to run your life, right? I mean,
exactly. It resolves, and then when it resolves, that energy is released. And then we are now in a position where we are under the triangle in this open-hearted state. And the reason it's below the triangle is, again, if you think in terms of grounding, like where's your center of gravity, I'm pointing to my sort of hips. But it's this sort of place of feeling very, very tethered, tethered to oneself. Now, there are other ways that you can get in the open-hearted state. I don't know if you remember reading, but let me just say, I adapted the C's of the open-hearted state. So the open-hearted state is the state of the authentic self.
Right.
Which means that you are who you are with all your qualities, and you take your good with your bad. You can accept your flaws. You know your good points. You can feel good about yourself. You can accept your flaws. And you can see all the feelings happening as they're happening. That's the ideal. It's a lifelong process, right? This is not like ba-doom, and then you go there.
But it's a simple. What I love about it's almost like it's like an owner's manual for dealing with your feelings. It's like this is like the hack. how to like literally. I mean, it's not like it's super. I mean, but it really is. It's really my sense of it is okay. So everybody has core emotions, and if you're not feeling them directly, then they're going to show up as shame, guilt, or anxiety, or through the defenses, which are addictions or perfectionism, workaholism, whatever. So
judgments. Aggression,
blame,
all sorts of things.
It's like there's these three areas that are going to happen. And if you know how to navigate that triangle, you can have a really great life. And so it doesn't have to be that complex. I mean, yes, you're going to have the ups and the downs. And having like an AEDP therapist like you is somebody that can really help a person navigate those things so that these things can actually resolve and that you don't have to stay in therapy for 20 years, right?
Yes, exactly. It's exactly, you got it. Exactly right. The other thing that I was going to say about this open-hearted state of the authentic self is that it's characterized by these C words that I adapted from Richard Schwartz from Internal Family Systems Therapy, which is also a great therapy. And so the C's, you're in your open-hearted state when you feel calm, or calm enough. Again, doesn't have to be totally calm, but calm enough. You're feeling courageous. You're feeling clear enough that you have access to your thoughts, that you can think through something. Compassionate to yourself, compassionate to others. Curious in yourself and curious in the world. And you can just try to sometimes, if you're in a state, like look for those C's and try to shift into them. Yes. And it's possible sometimes. Like look for your compassion and look for your curiosity. It's not easy in the throes of a trigger. If somebody hurts your feelings and you're like, oh, I'm going down. Right. But then, okay, be compassionate to myself. It's not my fault. This happens. It's temporary, to be able to think through things and just try to stay anchored. Doesn't mean you feel great all the time. Yeah.
One of the things I also love that you cover is how our culture teaches us not to get too big for our britches, or not to seem like we're conceited or arrogant, and how maybe we could do a change triangle with me on this, because I'm in this space, and just so you know, for the people at home, I've just had these major sort of awakenings in the past 6 months, just because I've really been working through a lot of my childhood trauma, and I'm noticing all this life force energy opening up. I'm more energized. I'm just feeling like I want to express myself more, and yet our culture says don't get too big for your britches, and so maybe we could do the change triangle on that for me. Do you mind?
Yes, absolutely. No, I would love that. And where I would begin is, and it's hard because you're doing a show, but I would want to slow us way down. Okay. So you may not be able to do that because you need some adrenaline. Yeah. So I'd ask you to put your feet on the floor. Okay. And I would teach you to sort of do these deep belly breaths, which are on my website, where you breathe and let your belly expand. And we'd really slow down. And you're awesome. And Mary, so I would say, as you recognize all these achievements that you have done in the last years and how hard you've worked and the fruits of your labor, and you sort of scan your body head to toe, what sensations or emotions are you aware of? And can we name as many as you can fine, no matter how small.
Well, I mean, the sensations in I noticed like a feeling in my like stomach, like just sort of
Mm-hmm.
but almost like a little tension. Like part of me
Mm-hmm.
feels really proud of what I've done, and the other part of me is
Yeah,
scared to admit that because I'm afraid that people watching are going to go, "Oh, who does she think she is?"
right. So I'm wondering if we could ask that scared part to
Yeah.
step outside the room, and if it gets upset, it can come back in.
Okay.
Just you can and even ask that part of you, is it willing to the fear to step aside,
Yeah.
just so we could make a little room for
Okay.
pride in the self, because pride in the self is like, talk about food. It is so nourishing.
Mm.
And so I'm wondering if you can notice what tells you inside, if you gave yourself, made lots of room for pride,
Yeah.
what does pride feel like in your body?
It feels like I want to just go like this and just
Yeah,
like get bigger and just
great.
move and express and sing and dance and play and yeah.
Great, great. So just notice that. And sort of you
Yeah.
went like this for a moment ago.
Yeah.
Even if you let yourself like really expand
Yeah.
and just notice what that's like 20 seconds of just attention, right? Just to mark it in the brain, just noticing. It's very passive, just noticing the experience inside your body of expansion.
It just feels, there's a feeling of just a joyful feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, if we were working together, I would say, can you stay with it a little longer? Just stay and
Yeah.
notice what happens, because attention is like a scalpel to a surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
Attention is the scalpel for the psychotherapist. When we draw our attention,
Yeah.
it's coming from a part of the brain that's close to the cerebral
Right.
cortex. When we draw attention, it actually starts to activate the neurons, and this
Okay.
is where we get change. So again, if you just spend 20 seconds noticing, staying with these expansive feelings,
Oh, that's cool. So like just okay, let me just do it for
just
you.
following them, and to notice what that's like.
It feels like it just feels like a lot of energy moving and whirling in my body.
Yeah. So now, what that sort of tells me is, and you mentioned it before, that with so much sort of pride, that
Yeah.
sometimes it can make you anxious because it wants to actually come out
Yes.
go past the confines of your physical body.
Right.
So then I would say, and I think you said it already spontaneously before, can you imagine if all this energy, of this prideful energy, could come out and just in
Fully
in
express.
imagination fully express itself again,
Yes.
like, where there's no limits of reality? What do you feel like doing? What would it look like?
Well, I mean, actually, I mean, I used to sing and play guitar in coffee houses and
Yeah.
cafes like 30 years ago, and so I just
Wow.
recently and I used to always sit down and play, and I just recently
Yeah.
thought, I really want to stand up and play now. And
Yeah.
so I just
Yeah.
started practicing, and I can see myself getting out there and doing more music again. So
Yeah.
and just expressing,
Yeah.
expressing my joy,
Yeah.
expressing my emotions, and just being that authentic, vulnerable self. And actually,
Yeah.
what shut me down from a music standpoint back in the
Yeah.
'90s was I just didn't have the capacity to uh, to put myself out there and be vulnerable. I didn't have
Yeah.
I hadn't done the work on myself yet, so it was like there was just no
Yeah.
way. I had to pull way back.
Yeah, it's so hard. It was excruciating, I imagine. Like
Yeah.
and, yeah, and then you must have developed some of this kind of like core self, this sort of sense of self where you could sort of balance the shame or the nervousness or the vulnerability,
Well, what I did is I went
and
into
go. Yeah,
becoming an entrepreneur, and that was a lot
yeah,
safer.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So how wonderful that you have this fantasy.
Yeah.
And then I guess I would have you visualize that right there, and then you sort of went to a future desire
Yeah.
but I would have you also just stay with, I think you made some gesture about like almost like jumping for joy and
Yeah.
expand,
Yeah.
just letting that energy come out. Like when the book came out for me, or really when the New York Times article came out in 2015, and I had so much attention, I never in a million years went viral, and I got just so many emails.
Yeah.
I was so anxious. I was overwhelmed by the excitement
Yeah.
and the pride, and so I started to really just like have to work with it, and
Yeah.
imagine my all my these grandiose fantasies that when we can imagine them, we don't
Yeah.
become grandiose. That
Well,
it's
that's
only
so
when
cool.
fantasies are blocked. Yeah.
So just then, so what I'm hearing is
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like let that fantasy of whatever your dream is for yourself, just like just ride it and play in it and enjoy it and allow it to transform your brain and your whole psyche and being.
Yes, the only caveat is this idea of one can have a fantasy about what one wants to do. This is working in the here and now of the moment,
Right.
and it's dictated actually by the body sensations and the physical energy. So right now, as it comes up and could fully express itself, what's the impulse? What do you see yourself doing?
Right. Okay.
So one is in a moment, and one is then ultimately channeling that into the future because you
Got
want
it.
it to translate out into the world. So just
Awesome.
a minor distinction. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I just thought it would be kind of fun to
Th-
actually
That's
have an
awesome.
experience of the change
Yeah.
triangle. That
How
was
was
like a,
that for
that's like
you?
it was great. It was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel really vulnerable on one level because I'm on live Facebook on a global level, but on the other
Yes.
level, I've done so much work on just self-acceptance that I feel okay. I mean, I feel safe, and I feel safe with you.
Yeah.
So,
Oh.
yeah, thank you.
Aw, you're so welcome.
So we're kind of right at the top of the hour here. So let's see. What I like to wrap up with is so when you say the title of the book, it's not always depression, which is I'm going to hold this up by the way.
There it is.
When you say that, then what you really mean is
To finish it, it's not always depression, it's life
yeah,
in many
yeah,
ways. It's just what happens to us, being human,
yeah,
just being human.
yeah, yeah, and learning how
We
to
need to know
navigate
that.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, and we need to know emotional health is mental health.
yeah,
And it is time where everyone deserves an emotion education. And the book is basically full emotion education in a box,
yeah.
explaining trauma, explaining attachment without any jargon, making it simple with
It
stories.
really,
So it's
yeah.
pleasurable to read.
I mean, I have made so many, I mean, oh my God, there's so many notes and highlights. And so you guys have got to get the book. Get the book. It'll change your life, really. Now, if somebody wants to take it further, and, well, first of all, how can they contact you? If somebody
Well,
wanted to
the
contact
best thing, yeah, my website is HilaryJacobsHendel.com or
Okay,
thechangetriangle.com. You can just Google my name. And I
right.
have free resources on my website. I have a blog. I send out once a month a new piece of writing, and I don't sell my lists, and I don't spam, and
Yeah,
there's no advertisements. And then the AEDP Institute. I mean, I have
yes.
resources in the book and on my website because there's not enough of these therapists.
Yeah,
Again, there needs to be many more, especially in the middle of the country. But people can email me if they have any questions. The email is in the footer of my website. It's HilaryJacobsHendel@gmail.com.
and
The AEDP Institute to look into
this
if you're
getting a
interested
therapist
in.
that's trained in what you just kind of
Yes,
shared a little bit. Yeah,
exactly. And if there's any therapists watching this and are interested, there's free articles and information there. Richard's, if you can't find an AEDP therapist in your neck of the woods, IFS,
yes,
all these experiential therapies, somatic
yes.
experiencing, EMDR, these are all in the same range, but this is
Right.
AEDP is my special home.
Well,
It's
yeah, it's
amazing.
really,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and when you guys, if you get the book and read it, you're going to
Yeah.
be blown away by the stories that Hilary shares of these clients that come in that have been suffering from depression, anxiety, perfectionism, whatever, you name it, for years, and just through using this technique and with Hilary's expertise, of course, they have a life they really love, again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really transformational, especially if you have any kind of childhood trauma, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual. To me, you have to do body, mind based therapy, psychotherapy like this.
Yeah. You have to.
So I always like to ask, what message are you most passionate about? You want to leave with our listeners today? Just a couple sentences.
Learn about emotions. It will take away the shame just in knowing that you're not weak for having them.
Yeah.
Just understand that. Just understand how they work. You go in high school and you learn that you have a stomach and a heart and a brain.
Right.
It's much more useful to understand how emotions work in the body and to learn a few things about emotions. And whether you work the change triangle on your own or you start peer groups with people that you know, or you work it with your partner, your lover, or you bring it to a therapist or someone in the clergy, a counselor. This helps life in every.
Well, it's just like when we get educated on nutrition, we need to get educated on how to work with our emotions. I mean, to me,
it's the missing piece.
Yeah,
it's the future.
Yeah, it's like this is what makes your life really worth living and makes you alive, or makes you sad and depressed. So, invest in your emotional health. So get Hilary's book. It's Not Always Depression. It's an amazing book. And Hilary, thank you so much. This has been amazing having you. I really, really, like I said, it's been a great journey reading your book. It's really given me a lot of major breakthroughs, and I hope that everybody will buy it or at least go to your website, because you've got some free downloads on your website too of the change triangle and everything, I noticed.
Yeah, and the articles are all there, and they're all it's the same thing. Yeah. I'm just trying to share emotion education and to keep it sort of, contained, and that's my mission. So thanks, Mary. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Have a great night, and
bye, everybody.
Take care.
Okay,
wow.
Take care.
That was great. Wow. Again, it's not always depression. Get the book. You deserve to have emotional freedom, and this is what this will do for you. Let's see. I do a coaching challenge every single time I have a show, and I always like to tie it in with my guest. And so basically it's about using the change triangle to uncover your core emotions. So if this is too uncomfortable to do on your own, then I would say get Hilary's book or find an AEDP therapist. And stay informed about emotional health and childhood trauma. You can go to my site. I've got the ACEs survey on my site, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Just understanding what the process was for me to go through as a child, and then how I adapted all these different ways to cope with it, was healing for me. Just to have a cohesive narrative, like a story that made sense without gaps, like Hilary talks about, is hugely healing. So just understanding will take you quite a bit down the road. The other thing is, just write it down. Just do one thing that you can do to really help your emotional health, and you'll be amazed at what happens. Also, as a coach, I am a life coach. I've been a coach for 20 plus years, and I love working with women that are in midlife that are wanting to live their passion, that are wanting to share their gifts with the world, but are feeling stuck. And I know I used to be there, and I am living 100% authentic in my life today. And the only reason I am is because I hired a coach. And on my own, I couldn't get there. And it was really painful. So if you are at a place in your life where you don't want to, be on your deathbed wishing that you had done something that you could feel really passionate about, and give me a call. Go to my website, marygiuliani.net, and there's a coaching section there, and it'll talk about what I do and all my fees and all that stuff. I want to talk about who's going to be on next month. I have got Kathy Brous, and she's the author of Don't Try This Alone, The Silent Epidemic of Attachment Disorder. Oh my God. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit of just to kind of give you a feel for what this is about, because I didn't understand what this was, and I've been doing all this trauma work lately, but now I really get it, and it's really powerful. So here's a little blurb about Kathy. So Kathy was an overachiever, an economist, a technical writer, and a classical singer. She was married 27 years to her college sweetheart, and it looked like she was fine, but deep within her hid a pain from infancy so severe that a cascade of adult life crises finally triggered it, and once it exploded, the pain was unbearable. Kathy was suffering from attachment disorder, a psychological condition potentially affecting almost half of the United States population. And it's caused by traumatic stress in the first 3 years of life. And it actually, attachment disorder correlates with 50% divorce rate in our country or in the world, and many mental health issues. So no one's really talking about this, and so she's got an amazing book, and I can't wait to talk to her. So make sure you tune in for Kathy Brous, and that's going to be on April 18th. That's going to be a really great show. So if you've ever struggled with maintaining intimate relationships, this show is for you, or even friendships. So with that, like I always do at the very end of my show, is I want to ask you to think of one thing that you're going to do to be true to you. Put it on your calendar and do it, and you will be amazed at what happens when you put yourself first, because you deserve it. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you next month.